Greetings, good people. Welcome to another edition of Leaders and Learners, where we know that the best leaders are lifetime learners. We are here at the South Bay edition, where we have the opportunity to chat with one of our amazing Ed board members that's going to talk to us about Measure S. So many people, we don't know what it is, what it's going to cost us, all those things. Today, we have someone that's going to be able to, yeah, whoa.
So let me introduce Dan Elder. He's a longtime respected member of our school board and an all-around good guy. So let's say hi to Dan. Introduce yourself, Dan. Thanks.
I know. Thank you. It's great to be here today. I really appreciate you inviting me on your show. I appreciate the opportunity also to be able to help, inform the public, answer questions. This is a great opportunity to ask them because these are complicated issues and they have consequences for decades to come. So it is really important that we get these types of things right. And it's great that people are engaged and part of this. So thank you for having me here, and thank you for everyone participating.
That's great. Dan, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. I kind of wanted to know, would you be able to go through a little bit of a background, maybe some history? How did we get here to where we need to pass Measure S? Would you mind going over that with us?
Yeah, perfect. And one of the things I really like to do is when I have these conversations with people is start with how public schools are funded in California, because that is kind of a complicated topic and very few people really understand how do schools get paid. And so the basis is in California, we have what's called the local control funding formula. And what that does is for every student you have, based on their grade level, because you get a little bit more for high school, a little bit less for other grades, you get a certain amount of funding. And then if that student is an English language learner, a foster youth, homeless youth, they qualify for free or reduced lunch, you get a supplemental amount of funding for them. And then if you have a school that has a massive concentration, I think somewhere around 60% of those students, then you get a significant boost. And the idea behind LCFF is that you're giving resources where they're needed. And that is a good idea. The challenge we have as a wealthier community is we don't have a lot of high needs. So people think that they pay all these property taxes and sales taxes and everything else. That means they should have good schools. And the reality is, you hear this a lot from neighboring districts. We are one of the lowest funded per pupil districts in the state. So it's not something that is great for us locally, but it is something where the state really relies on us to supplement that. So for our funding, 84% of our budget comes from this local control funding formula, which is this formula that doesn't penalize us, but it doesn't reward us the way a lot of other districts get rewarded in terms of how they're funded. So on top of that, we have these facility needs. And like most things in the city, we've got a city with an incredible history. We've been around for a lot longer than many cities out there. And same with our school district. Our high school was founded in 1905. So we have 13 schools. They are on average over 70 years old. And we have an incredible maintenance and operations department that does a lot of projects to keep them up and running. But it is something where as things age, they have to be fixed and repaired. And the way schools are funded in California, that funding doesn't really come from the state. The way the state incentivizes you to take on those types of projects is they'll provide matching dollars. So they won't directly pay for a new school or these huge maintenance projects. But if you have your own local funds, they will match them for some of these types of projects. And you see that on the ballot in November. We've got this Proposition 2, which is this massive bond, statewide bond, that will provide matching dollars when local districts are doing these types of projects. So again, they don't directly fund it, but if you have your own funding source, meaning a local bond or a parcel tax, those are the typical options. That's how you can get those matching dollars. And that's why you see so many school districts going out for bonds right now. So the whole process for Measure S really started years ago. Even with the previous superintendent, this is one of his goals, to evaluate the feasibility of another bond, because it's something districts unfortunately have to do periodically because we don't have this funding source for these types of major projects. And so we've been looking at it for years. Back in 2022, we conducted a facility needs assessment where an architect worked with all of our staff to the various school sites and really looked at the condition of our buildings, our campuses, looked at safety needs, modernization needs, seismic retrofitting, all the infrastructure around it, and put together a facility master plan. And that was kind of our blueprint for, at each school site, what types of projects do we need to do just to maintain them and keep them current and safe. And then there were some nice to haves in there as well. That facility master plan is available on RBUSD.org. If you go to the website, you will see on the top left, there's a little button that'll take you all this information. You can see this very detailed breakdown of per school site, what types of projects they were looking at. But the thing to keep in mind is that's some of that includes some more wish list type things, which are great. So as a board, what we did is we sat down with this facility master plan, and then we added a lot of campus safety enhancements because we saw what happened last December and how when you have schools that weren't really designed for the threats we face today, it's going to take some additional work to provide more secure entrances, better perimeter security, camera systems, things like that. And we wrapped that up with technology to support it and to support our students. And that came out to about $450 million. So that was a huge number. That's way more than we felt the community would support or that we would support. And so we had 6 dedicated board meetings specifically to work on that list and whittle it down. And we did. We purged a lot of projects. So when you look at the facility master plan, don't assume that everything on there is part of what's going into this bond, because we did cut a lot of pieces out that we didn't think were strictly needed. We really wanted to focus on the core pieces that schools need to function, and then add pieces like campus safety on top of that. So we've spent a long time getting to this point, but I want to make sure that the public knows that this isn't something that we came up with in a hurry. It wasn't something arbitrary. We've spent years working on this plan and getting to this point so that we can, be very responsible with the amount of money we're asking for, because we realize it is a lot, but it is spread out over 13 school sites. And that's kind of in a nutshell how we got to Measure S today.
Okay. There was a lot to unpack there. So let's go back for a second. The state Proposition 2, I want people to understand that I think the school district, Redondo School District, is eligible for about $100 million. And that is not a given. We have to have the money to match whatever they're going to give us. So you can't support 2 and expect money to trickle down to the school if you don't support Measure S. So is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So the way the state matching fund works is it's kind of a first come, first serve. So you do see a lot of school districts going out right now because there is this fear of missing out. If Proposition 2 passes and we don't have local funds available, other school districts are going to be able to do a lot of nice things, and they're going to be able to refurbish things, and they're going to have functioning roofs and electrical systems and all that stuff we want to ensure we have. So we'll be paying for that, but we won't have any of that resource available to us because we don't have a local bond. Likewise, if all that funding gets used up before it gets to us, we're still in line for the next statewide bond. So we don't count on those funds coming in, right away. Those aren't part of our critical need to complete these really critical projects. But we do count on it because it does help. And we see that with every bond we pass, we do get those matching dollars. It just usually takes quite a few years, 3-4 years, sometimes longer. So it would be very helpful for Proposition 2 to pass and provide us those matching funds. It's not a critical showstopper at all, but it does stretch our local dollars a lot further.
Sure. And we'll be competing because everyone should know that Redondo is not unique in having a school bond. Hermosa, Manhattan, and Palos Verdes all have school bonds on their November ballot this year. So everybody's got their hand out, and I'm sure the need's out there. So we're not going to, it's going to be a competition to get those Prop 2 funds. So we need to support it with our local funding.
Absolutely. And one other thing to highlight, because I've heard some confusion out there, early versions of Proposition 2 really allocated those matching dollars more to districts with higher needs. And that's not what was in the final bill. So the final bill, there's really only a 5% differential. I know I've seen some letters to the editor and some online media posts. So there is confusion there because there were different versions of the bill and things changed a little bit. But the final version is one that is much more beneficial for us.
Miriam?
Yeah, so Dan, it sounds like one of the first things that this, if this measure passes, one of the first things that'll be funded is securing the schools. And we all know that school shootings is only going up, not down. Is that correct to say? I've heard some talk around that, but my understanding is that the first thing that we would do is secure our schools with that money if this is passed. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And even prior to December, we had the Ensuring Safety Proactively Committee. This is a superintendent committee. This was multiple times. So it first formed, I think, 5 or 6 years ago. And then we had it a couple years ago as well, because the threats against schools, unfortunately, are changing and evolving over time. So it's something that we'll periodically have to do to reassess the state of our schools and their safety. And I got to serve in that committee. It was invaluable. RBPD was part of it, a lot of community leaders, a lot of experts in safety. And out of that came a lot of recommendations for safety enhancements that our schools need. And some of those were relatively easy or cheap to be able to provide. Enhanced communications plans, things like that. So you've seen some of that communication from your school side of who do you call in an emergency, how will you receive communication from the district in an emergency. We've tried to really clean up a lot of those things and standardize them. But other things, higher fencing, privacy screens, secure entries, camera systems, those get very expensive. And we're looking at, maybe $10 million to $20 million. There's a lot of projects you would need to do there to really make our campuses more secure. And the good thing about those is those are relatively quick projects to do. You don't have to go through the Division of State Architects, which is this California agency, which can take forever to get your projects through. So if you're building classrooms or things like that, you can be stuck cutting this red tape forever. A lot of these safety systems we could do very quickly. And there's even some vendors who have offered, before we even start selling bonds, they would be able to essentially loan us the money at 0% interest in advance, knowing that we've passed a bond and we would be able to repay them later. So some of those security things we could do very quickly, which I know for a lot of parents in the community is a big concern. For the broader community, it really isn't. They're more focused on just maintaining the infrastructure, which is something else we need to do. But yes, that's certainly a one we could start fast.
Are those local security companies?
Some are, most are. So like on the technology side, there's only a few major vendors who do that, so they're not local. But for things like fencing and bullet resistant glass and some of those other door access controls, they might be local.
Okay, fantastic.
So, okay, back to the cost, right? I've been seeing a lot of different things, numbers floating around. I mean, we have what you said here. The cost will be $29.95 per 100,000 of assessed value of the home, right? But I read something from another board member, Rolf Stritzenberg. He's saying that Measure S would increase the current tax rate by over 40%. So I think this is not 40%. So can you clarify that for us a little bit, Dan? Is this is the correct number, correct? This is what it would cost? What we have up on the screen?
So no one ever knows the exact cost because it's going to depend on the assessed value of all the properties for that year, which is a number that's generally increasing, along with interest rates at the time of the bond sale. So you use bond advisors who have these very complicated projections where they can look at the historical increase in assessed value of properties. They can look at all those types of things, and they give you that projection. So this is the best number we have possible. That doesn't mean it's perfect, but this is their best estimate. And some estimates are higher, some are lower, but this is right in the middle.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that, because that was what my understanding was as well. But it does get challenging when there's chatter, which is why
no matter what the assessment is of the properties, the maximum amount that would be collected would be the agreed upon 278 million.
Yes, that's correct. So that's the number the voters get to approve is the total amount of the bond, and then there's a max cap on how much. I think it's $60. Of course, we're nowhere near that. So you in a worst case scenario, if you really had some terrible projection, you could see something like that, but that's never happened. So
you said a max cap per resident?
100,000 of per 100,000 of assessed value. But that's not a number anyone ever has to deal with because no one ever gets close to there. But
so
yes, so the bond amount.
So the $29.95 could go up. It could be higher than $29.95. It could go lower.
It can, and it has. So, for example, with our previous bonds, we've been able to take advantage of lower interest rates and refinance them just the way you would refinance your home mortgage when interest rates go down. And that doesn't give the district more money. That just means we're charging taxpayers less, which is something we will always continue to do because, absolutely, let's save people money. So interest rates right now are a little bit higher than normal. As those go back down, we would certainly take the opportunity to refinance those and lower everyone's tax burden because we do realize there are a lot of people out there with fixed incomes or who are, it is a big ask. And we want to be certainly very cognizant of that because I have family in the area as well who are on fixed incomes and every penny counts. So we want to make sure we're very responsible with what our ask is and how we spend it.
So let's keep it simple, really quick for the people. If this does not get passed, then what?
So if the bond is not passed, There's some projects that we just simply wouldn't do because we don't have funding sources for.
Like,
Things like
like what? Yeah, I'm sorry.
yeah. So there's a lot of projects in the list. And again, if you go to the RBUSD.org website, there's a spreadsheet which breaks down these board prioritized categories, things like new roofs, the campus safety enhancements. One of the categories is replacing these modular classrooms. So if you've been to some of these CDC bungalows or some of these classroom bungalows, these are temporary classrooms. They're getting to or past their end of life, and they're rusting. They're a very dreary environment for kids to learn. And we know kids are going to do better when they have a classroom that doesn't have droopy walls and ceilings, when it has a windows. So those types of projects, we don't have a funding source for at all. So that's something that's only going to probably happen if it's part of a bond. I can't say it would never happen, but we just don't have a source of funding for it. Things like repairing roofs, we're going to always do everything we can to keep our roofs from leaking, but we're not going to probably have funding to replace them. And then, you know, a lot of these other projects, you would just really be seeing delayed. So it's one of those where, yes, I've got a leak in my roof. I should replace the roof. I'll just patch it up for now, but it's going to be more expensive if I wait. So a lot of these projects are only going to get more expensive over time. So at some point, we will have to pass a bond to pay for those types of projects. It's just cheaper if we do it now. Other things where you would see, you know, challenges is things like technology. So Measure Q, which was a previous bond, included a 10-year technology endowment plan, and that was 10 years of Chromebooks and all this classroom technology, which served us so well during the pandemic. We were very lucky to have that well before the pandemic. But that technology endowment fund is used up at this point. So we are paying for things like Chromebooks and a lot of other technology out of the general fund revenue, essentially. And that's a draw on other resources, because when you're spending money on Chromebooks, you can't spend money on teachers, or that takes money from other sources. So there's a lot of different areas you have to look at and figure out how you're going to pay for these types of things, because we have nowhere near the budget, and we never will, to be able to do all these projects without an external funding source.
Yeah, the public should also understand that if you read this, there's a lot of information right in here. The funding from the bond cannot be used for salaries. It's only for really actually hard cost on real projects. So that's just one definition. I don't know. It's such an obvious investment in our community to vote yes on this bond. I've supported the past two bonds, and we've seen dividends from that. One, you guys you're one of the best school districts in Southern California, working with the lowest, per pupil investment, or money from the state, which is an amazing. Kudos to you guys. But also, good, strong schools make good communities. It's just a proven fact. So it's a good investment for everyone to invest in good schools, because they bring new people into the community, younger people in the community that want to bring their children to these schools. I've seen it myself, and it's turned around just my neighborhood, because the schools are so great.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, people need to remember your property values go up. When our schools are great, your property values will be great. And if our schools are not, then it will drop. So it's an investment in yourself, in your own property, if people want to view it that way. I think this is great. In general, I'm always pro improving our schools, because children are our future, and it's very important. And that's why we appreciate people like Dan, who this is a volunteer position to be on the school board. And it's a lot of hours, and it's a lot of work. And I think our schools are great because of our school board, because of our leadership, and because of the parents. Let's not forget the PTA is what really enhances the school experience. If it wasn't for that, and where do those parents come from? Those parents come because of our great schools. People are moving, to Paul's point, into our neighborhoods, and those are the people that are working in the schools and volunteering their time as well. So, anytime we can enhance, especially security, man, we really need to enhance the security at the schools. I mean, at this point, anybody can just walk right on into any school and do whatever they want, and I think this is well worth just the safety investment.
Dan, can you tell us, and this kind of goes back to what, if the bond passes or fails, the percentage of new construction and new projects as opposed to just refurbishment and maintenance of older projects? Is there, just off the top of your head, is there a split that's roughly known?
Yeah, so most of this is not new construction. So when we did a bond survey of the community to understand what their priorities were versus what we've identified as needs, there was pretty broad support for all the types of projects you would typically see in a bond. The one area there wasn't was expanding athletic facilities. And that makes perfect sense because when you look at our high school, we do have amazing athletic facilities. So that was easy for us to cut all those types of projects from the facilities master plan and really eliminate those. So in terms of new construction, the only new buildings really part of this prioritized bond list is replacing the portable classrooms. And then we also would like to, there's one building at the high school, it's called the bingo room. For those who've driven down Diamond, you may have seen it. It's actually built by the Public Works Administration. So it's quite old. It's got fantastic programming in it right now. So what we want to do is be able to preserve that programming, but rebuild it as a 2-story, 6-classroom career technical education building to really open up some of these new opportunities for our students. So for anyone who might have seen our board meeting last night, we had this fantastic program that's now offered in our Adams School. It's college and career experiences, and students get to try things like being an EMT or a nurse or a drone pilot or cosmetology or all these different programs. So there's a lot of different pathways we really want to be able to expose students to, but the classrooms that were designed 70 years ago weren't really built for that. So those are the only new construction projects I would say, and I would guess that's somewhere around 20% of the total bond amount. In terms of the modernization, which is all the things of maintaining now, we've got old facilities we need to replace plumbing and electrical and broken windows. That's probably around 40 to 45% of the total, I would say. And that modernization piece is what's eligible for matching.
Yeah, and those are the projects that they're in your face. They got to get fixed, and so they become immediate. It's unfortunate if this doesn't pass, and it needs 55% to pass of the votes. If it doesn't pass, we don't see those new buildings come. Those will be the first on the chopping block. And again, how old are those portable classrooms in some of our schools?
They're old. Some of them are over 20 years old, and they were never designed to be used for that long. So when you've got some students in a real classroom with 4 walls and a roof and windows and ventilation and everything else, and then you've got some students in these portable rooms where there's a tiny little window, really dreary lighting, sagging floors, things like that. It's leaks in the corner. It's not beneficial for education, because ultimately what it all comes down to is educating kids. And we don't want to give them the Taj Mahal or anything crazy like that. We just want to give them a good, clean, safe environment so that we can really make sure that we're focused on their education and that they're not sitting in the corner with hypothermia because the heaters don't work, or having to cancel classes like Torrance did because they don't have cooling systems. These are important considerations.
Now, with your board, is everybody in agreement with the bond?
I wouldn't say everyone's in agreement. 4 of us certainly are, and we've been very vocal in our support. But yeah, it's something where going back to what you said, we have an amazing community. So our PTAs, our Ed Foundation, so many parent volunteers, Beach Cities Health District, all these organizations are in our schools every day. And you always talk about it takes a village to raise a child, and we have an incredible village. And that's one of the secrets that makes our school district so strong. But it does take that continued investment. And going back to, we're going to have to pass a bond at some point to pay for these types of projects, and it only gets more expensive. And you can look at a neighboring district like PV to see what happens when they don't pass bonds, because they do have one of the lowest bond tax rates. And I think that's actually the lowest. But at the same time, they've got multiple schools that are powered off generators at this point because their electrical systems are outdated and fried. They've got sewage leaks. They've got so many fundamental problems that really significantly impact student education. I don't want to see us ever get to that point or anything like that. That's where we're trying to be really proactive in addressing some of these before these repairs become more costly and before students have to suffer from poor educational systems.
Yeah, the PV bond is actually called SOS, and it's for the exact same amount of money and the exact same assessment on everyone's property. So they're behind the 8 ball now. They've got themselves in a bad position. Torrance did this to themselves also. They wouldn't pass the school bond forever. And I remember one day walking through North High because I had a friend that was a teacher there. Mm-hmm. And I noticed there wasn't a single window in that entire school that wasn't boarded up. Every single window in the entire school was broken. So they just, school bonds are worth the investment. They are definitely worth the investment. You do not want to fall behind on these things because the problems just get worse.
Dan, they're in a situation. I was going to say they're in a situation where they're going to need multiple bonds just to catch back up. And that's something we looked at. We didn't want to have to ask the community for multiple, a bond now and then a bond 6 years from now or something like that. We really wanted to make this something that would last and just go to the community one time, because we've tried to really build that trust. So hopefully the community will agree.
For someone that talks to parents all the time, I know for a fact they brag about how amazing Redondo schools are, right? We get number one in this, number two in that. And there are also people that think, well, they don't need all this money in order to be great educators. Make that make sense for them. We believe it does. We believe that the ability to provide quality education and keep our kids at the forefront of what is considered stellar in not just Southern California, but nationwide, it will require for us to invest in them. But there are some people that seem like that might not make sense to them. They don't need all these new improvements in order to stay highly ranked. Explain to me why that is a fallacy.
Yeah, so I would say we again, our maintenance and operations team does an incredible job keeping our schools in as great a condition as they can. There's a lot of curb appeal there when you see them from the outside. When you get into the inside, you do start to notice some of the problems, some of the issues, and we do everything we can to mitigate that. But you really want to have pride in your community and pride in your public facilities and pride in your schools. And you certainly want your students to have that, because they do notice when they go to other schools and they see that, oh, they've, their windows open and close, or they've got, their roofs don't leak, things like that. They do notice, and they do pay attention, and it reflects on how much they are proud of their schools and how much effort they put into them. If you put a student in a really great environment, they're going to be proud of that environment and want to work harder in it. If you put them in some dilapidated building that doesn't have heating and cooling, they see that too and know that it's not a priority. Education's not important. So we want to make sure that our students know how important education is. We want to support them on their educational journey with everything we can. And it is important. And again, we're not trying to do anything that I would consider crazy. Neighboring districts, you've seen them put in some very expensive facilities that are a bit controversial. We're not trying to expand any of those types of facilities or build anything like that. We're just trying to maintain what we have and modernize it a bit, keep it safe, keep it clean, and it's something our community can be proud of.
Awesome. Hey, Miriam?
So safety, keeping the stuff clean, and just really updating the things that need to be updated. Dan, before you leave us, is there anything you want to say? I mean, I'm sure as you've been walking and talking to neighbors and people in Redondo, I'm sure there have been some questions and concerns that have come up. Is there anything in particular you want to address here, like a common misconception or a common concern about this measure that people have stated? That way you can clarify it here on this podcast.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So some of the big ones typically are the difference between assessed value and real value. So bonds are levied against assessed value. That's what's on your property bill. What's your house is worth according to Zillow or something like that, that doesn't matter at all. So I know there's a lot of residents who are here with fixed incomes. They've been here for 40 years though. And if you've been here for 40 years, your property tax rate is already going to be incredibly low because of Prop 13. So this has minimal impact. It does have some impact, and we certainly want to be cognizant of that, because we always are aware of taxes are not free. But for those who are in that category and have been here for a long time on a fixed income, it will have much more minimal impact. Another misconception I've heard is that the bonds are for 35 years or 38 years or something like that. The bonds are all for 30 years. What happens with a bond this size, though, is you don't go out and sell all the bonds at once, because you can't do all the projects at once. So you break it up into different phases. So you might have 2 or 3 or even 4 phases. So when you see these types of things happening, your tax bill doesn't go up all at once. It's going to be staggered over multiple years. So it might be 5 years before all the bonds are sold. And at that point, old things roll off and things change. So you're not going to see this huge tax increase all at once. It's going to be staggered over multiple years, which is why sometimes you see bonds not fully roll off until 35 years after they're passed. That's because the last series of bonds wasn't even sold until 5 years after the bond was passed. So it gets a little bit confusing, but just something for people to be aware of. But yeah, those are kind of some of the big ones I hear.
Okay, so 30 years. I saw another board member had written 38. So it's 30, but it depends. It's from when it starts, is to your point. Like, so that's probably part of it.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure where 38 comes from, because the bond language itself specifically says 24, 25 to 20. When I have to see when it is, but it's only 35 years total. And again, that's because some bonds won't be sold for 5 years, probably.
Right.
They'll be,
Correct.
because you would not want to be updating every single school site at the same time. It's a lot of chaos. It's more expensive to do it that way, and that's not good for anyone.
Yeah. Thank you.
So the people out there that have been here the longest, who actually have very low assessed values, doesn't represent a big investment in their community. It's time to step up. I think I've been here all my life, but I've owned my house for about 25 years, so it is going to impact me. But I didn't even question this. I just looked at this. Yes, to support it. It's always paid off. And I don't have children. I don't have children in the school district, and I don't have children. So I just know that it's really improved things around my neighborhood. And I'm very close to Burl Heights, so I was amazed to find out that school was built in 1925, and it's the second oldest school next to the high school to be on the list. So I'm glad to see them get some love.
Yeah, definitely. Secure the schools, protect our children. I know that's my number one as somebody who has children in the schools, and it is a fear that we have. So very, very excited to vote yes. I have to send in my ballot, but yes, I will be voting yes.
And if there's someone that has already voted, a lot of my neighbors have voted early or they've sent in their ballot. Any advice for them if they've heard you and they've changed their mind? Is there other ways that they can support? Because I do know that there's a lot of people that still didn't understand. They just saw these measures come out and they were like, no, I don't want to pay more. But hearing you, I think, can definitely change some minds.
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage anyone who has questions, please reach out. I'm happy to answer anything. But talk to your neighbors, help people understand that this is a big ask, but we've really done our best to make sure we've kept it as minimal as possible and kept focused on just the core things that our students need to be successful and safe. And that investing in education is almost always a good investment. We've been very responsible over the years with the funding. We have some of the lowest funding in the state. We don't ask for money very often, but when we do need it to maintain what we have. And appreciate the community support so far, and hopefully they'll support this again.
Can't they contact the city clerk to get a new ballot if they've sent in a ballot and they change their mind?
I know for municipal elections, there's something, but these all go through LA County, I believe, at this point. So I don't know about that. That's a good question.
I was going to say that it sounds like a big ask, but it really isn't. Like I said, Palos Verdes is asking for almost the exact same amount of money. I believe Redondo is a bigger school district. And Manhattan and Hermosa also have very big numbers for how small they are. So I think that the way this is laid out for the size of Redondo, I think the money's all going to be very well spent. And of course, there's oversight. Every bond issue like this has to have impartial oversight that'll follow the entire course of the bond. There's people that are going to check this and make sure the money is spent correctly, and that's built right into the measure. So if you guys read your ballot, you'll see that, and it can't be changed. So there shouldn't be any concern about the money being wasted. School districts and for the most part government is all cut so close to the bone on everything that they can't be wasteful at all. It's just nonsense to think that money is not going to go to good use.
Right. Well, Dan, we want to thank you for taking the time to be here today and share this information with the listeners. We know that they have concerns, and we always try to provide answers and, answer their concerns. So thank you for being the amazing board member, resident, neighbor that you've been all these years.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. Thanks for everything you've done. I'm happy to support you, and I'll support you in your next election.
Absolutely.
Same, Dan.
Absolutely.
Thank you. You're
Thank
great.
you.
No, thank all of you. We have a great community. It takes all of us working together. So I really appreciate everything you guys do too.
All
Sure.
right. Well, you guys have a good one. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for showing up to the podcast where we all know that the best leaders are lifetime learners. When you get a sec, take a moment, leave a comment. What you think about today's episode, and share it with someone that you know could use the gems that were dropped today. Follow and subscribe. You don't want to miss who's coming up next. You never know who could show up here and what they could say. For your professional needs, marketing, PR, communications, and leadership, make sure you follow us on all social media platforms at Sand and Shores, or hit us up at sandandshores.com. Again, thanks so much for showing up. We appreciate you, and we'll see you soon.